Welcome back. Let's think about marginal costs and average variable costs. Yeah, I understand this is getting awfully jargony awfully quickly. So before we get into thinking about our table and maybe even making a graph, let's just think about how these costs fit together. So if we think about total costs, right? Total costs. So what are the total costs of a firm? Well, it's the fixed costs, things like rent, and it's the inputs, the materials they need, the labor they need, etc. So total costs are sort of the sum of two pieces. One is what we call fixed costs, and the other is what we call variable costs. So variable costs. Okay, so fixed costs maybe aren't all that interesting because they're constant. They don't change with the quantity of output, at least not in the short run, right? In the long run they could, but then they become variable costs in the long run. Your rent is fixed. If you run a coffee shop and your rent is $1,000 a month, it doesn't matter if you sell 1 cup of coffee or 1,000,000 cups of coffee, you're still paying that same rent. That's this idea with fixed costs, right? But variable costs, these variable costs change with the quantity of output. So as we produce more output, as we make more cups of coffee, we're going to need more coffee beans or coffee grounds, and we're probably going to need more labor to do it. So these variable costs changing as we increase quantity, variable costs increase as we increase quantity, right? Because in order to make more cups of coffee, we're going to need more coffee beans and we're going to need more labor. So this leads to an idea known as marginal cost, right? What's the cost of the next unit of output? What's the cost of the next cup of coffee? All right, so with some of these ideas in mind, let's go take a look at our table and let's think about how marginal cost compares to average variable cost. So, like I said, I know this is getting jargony. Let's start simple. Let's just fill in our column for marginal cost. So I've gone ahead and set up some information for us. Suppose that we're looking at producing maybe up to 5 cups of coffee. And the first cup of coffee requires 30 cents worth of inputs. So that's 30 cents worth of labor and coffee beans. The second cup of coffee takes our variable costs, so our costs of labor and our costs of coffee beans, up to 80 cents. Right? So now in order to produce 2 cups of coffee, we need a couple scoops of coffee grounds or beans, whatever it is, and we need some labor. But the problem is maybe for that second cup of coffee, now maybe the person that's making that one is waiting in line behind the first person. So maybe it's not quite as efficient. Let's sort of see how this plays out. All right, so for making just 1 cup of coffee, how much labor and beans do we need? We need 30 cents worth. So what was the marginal cost? What's the cost of that first cup of coffee? It's just 30 cents. All right, if we make 2 cups of coffee, now the cost of labor and beans is a total of 80 cents. So how much additional cost was there of producing this second cup? So the first cup cost us 30 cents. If 2 cups cost us 80 cents, that means that this marginal cost must be the difference, right? It's the change in our total for another unit of output. So what's our marginal cost of this second cup? It's going to be 50 cents. All right, what about if we go to a third cup? So if we make 3 cups of coffee, we need $1.50 worth of beans and labor. So how much additional cost is involved to make that third cup, right? What's our marginal cost for that third cup? Well, it's the difference between the $1.50 that we're now spending on these variable inputs, these variable costs, and the 80 cents we were spending at 1 unit lower. So our marginal cost is 70 cents. All right, I bet you're getting a feel for sort of how this is set up and what the pattern is. So what's our marginal cost for a 4th cup of coffee? It's 90 cents. And what about for that fifth cup of coffee? It's $1.10. So those are our marginal costs. All right, before we get to the average variable cost, let's just graph out our marginal costs and see what this looks like. So if we think about units of output, right, units of output or quantity, we want to look at our marginal cost, and in just a minute, our average variable cost as well. So how do these get measured? These just get measured in dollar terms. All right, so for our units, let's go ahead and we'll just kind of mark them on here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We don't need to worry a lot about scaling. We're after the intuition more than anything else. All right, so what was our marginal cost for that first cup of coffee? It was 30 cents. All right, what about our marginal cost for the second cup of coffee? It's 50 cents. What about our marginal cost for the third? It was 70 cents. What about for the fourth? It was 90 cents. And the fifth was $1.10. So as I've set this up, we have this marginal cost curve that's just a linear curve. It's just a line that's increasing with the number of units. That's the idea. All right, so now that we've got marginal cost, you saw where this was calculated from, right? You can understand how to plot it in. We see why it's upward sloping. What about average variable cost? What the heck is average variable cost? So average variable cost is we just take our cost of these variable inputs, right? The total cost of these variable inputs, and we divide by the units produced. So we say, in order to produce 1 cup of coffee, how much do we need in terms of beans and people? Divide by 1, and we know our average variable cost. If we're going to produce 2 cups of coffee, how much in terms of inputs do we need in terms of beans and people? We measure this in dollar terms, and we say, okay, if those are our costs, our total variable costs, then we just divide by the 2 cups of coffee we made, and we have found the average variable cost. So let's fill in this column. All right, so to produce 1 cup of coffee, we need 30 cents worth of beans and labor. So what's our average variable cost? It's just 30 cents. If we make 2 cups of coffee, we need 80 cents worth of beans and labor. So what is our average cost of beans and labor per cup of coffee? Our average variable cost. It's just 40 cents. Wait a minute, the numbers are starting to diverge. Yep, absolutely. Let's do a couple more and then we'll think about the intuition as the why. So for 3 cups, this is going to mean that we need $1.50 worth of beans and labor. So $1.50 worth of beans and labor divided by the 3 cups of coffee we made means that our average variable cost is just 50 cents. 4 cups at $2.40, so $2.40 worth of beans and labor spread across 4 cups of coffee means that our average cost of beans and labor, our average variable cost, is 60 cents. And then finally for the 5th cup, or for 5 cups, if we make 5 cups and it costs us $3.50, how much are we putting towards beans and labor for each cup of coffee? On average, it's 70 cents. So why is the average variable cost increasing but at a slower rate than the marginal cost? So let's graph it and then we'll come back and we'll think about it for a quick second. Right, so for 1 cup of coffee, these are the same. For 2 cups of coffee, our average variable cost was 40 cents. So higher than for the first cup. All right, for 3 cups of coffee, what did it increase to? It increased to 50 cents. At 4 cups of coffee, it's 60 cents. At 5 cups of coffee, it was 70 cents. So notice that our average variable cost is increasing as the number of units increases, just like marginal cost, but not as quickly. So why is that? Right? The marginal cost is the cost of the next cup of coffee. And if it's increasing, it's going to pull up the average. So think about it this way. Let's suppose that you're looking at your GPA and you say, what happens if this semester I get a 4.0? It's going to increase your average, but not by 4.0, right? Because it's combined with all that earlier work. Well, that's the same thing when we're talking about marginal cost versus average variable cost. So marginal cost is like, what's your GPA this semester? Average variable cost is like, what is your GPA over the whole time? So if you do better this semester, yes, it's going to pull up your GPA, but it's not going to pull it all the way up to what you did this semester. Just like as our marginal cost increases, it's pulling up the average cost, but not all the way to that marginal variable cost, right? Because that next cup of coffee gets averaged in with all those prior cups of coffee. So I hope you're starting to get a feel for what is marginal cost, what is average variable cost, and why do these two curves look similar but a little different from each other. I know, it's a lot of jargon, it's hard to work through the first time, but spend a few minutes going through it and really thinking about it, asking why, and I bet you can get to the point where you understand average variable cost and how it relates to marginal cost. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.